whatever exists in this universe is embraced in the divine, is enfolded in the divine. Delight in everything and in everyone without possessiveness. In other words, we should not be envious of others' flourishing, others' prosperity. We should also delight. It gives us a way of being in relation to the natural world, but also a way of being in relation with each other, that we should delight in each other's flourishing.
Can we still start with a little bit of human interaction?
Yes.
Before we dive into these big questions.
Yes.
Your own personal background. Where did you grow up? How did your vision of life get shaped?
I was born in the Caribbean, in Trinidad and Tobago. Yes. My great-grandfather migrated there in the mid-19th century. This is right after the abolition of the slave trade. And then the British economy in those islands, which was centered on sugarcane cultivation on the plantations, the economies were in crisis, so they were looking for alternative labor because the Africans naturally left the plantations. And they found such a good labor supply in India, in the poverty of Indian rural areas. So they were recruiting Indians to work on sugar plantations in the Caribbean, in South Africa, in Mauritius, in Fiji. And my great-grandfather, 19-year-old young man with very little economic prospects in India at that time, got on a ship, made a long journey from Kolkata to Trinidad and Tobago, and that's where I was born. But my grandfathers on both sides of my family were also farmers, but they were Hindu priests. Okay. And they served the community as ritual specialists. So I grew up in a very orthodox Hindu home where I developed a very deep spiritual interest in the Hindu tradition. So at the first opportunity, which is right after at the end of my undergraduate studies, I went to India at 21 years old, and I joined a Hindu monastery and studied with very traditional teachers for 3 years. Learned Sanskrit, read sacred texts, and immersed myself in spiritual disciplines and practices. I was on a path to Hindu monasticism, but I was very young. By that time I was 24 years old after 3 years of monastic studies and training. And I felt that I didn't know the larger world of religious study and academic inquiry to make such a profound commitment, because I thought at that time that once I took monastic vows, I would not be able to continue studying religion at an academic, scholarly level. So at that time, I made a decision to go back to graduate school. And so I went to the United Kingdom and I pursued my graduate studies, at the end of which, basically, I chose the life of a scholar and came to the United States to teach. And I'm very happy for the choices that I made, because these two streams continue to flow within me, sometimes in great tension. The stream of the practitioner, the stream of my Hindu commitment, and all of the questions and inquiries that also have their roots in academic inquiry and academic study. Yes, they live in tension, they live in harmony also, but I think I have a much richer life for the fact that I made those choices. I also think, Matt, that choosing the life of a scholar has given me a great deal of freedom to question, to interrogate interpretations, to interrogate structures without fear, of the kinds of consequences that might follow if I were in a much more traditional role in my tradition.
So you can sort of take some intellectual risks to explore and ask some questions that if you were responsible for a community, if that exploration was happening in a context
that is
of a
absolutely,
community,
yes.
You'd be taking risks with other people's
Absolutely,
lives.
absolutely
Yeah.
correct. So I have to walk, sometimes it's like a razor's edge that I have to walk. Because I do feel a sense of responsibility for my communities, but at the same time, I have to continue asking those kinds of questions that I think are important. So I am a sort of a critical lover of my tradition. I mean, there are many who are much more on the critical side, and there are those who are on the side of the lover. But to negotiate that journey that brings both the critical skills as well as the commitment is challenging, but at the same time, one has to be faithful to one's own self on this journey.
As you understand it, to whom are we responsible for the shape of our lives? Who do we answer to?
I think if I, would have tried to provide a response to that from my Hindu tradition, I would have to start, Matt, by, what is a widespread acknowledgement across Hindu traditions, as I would say, a sort of a core theological affirmation within the Hindu tradition that everything originates from the divine. The divine is clearly described in all of our traditions as that from whom or that from which everything has come, by which everything is sustained, and to which everything returns. It's the ground of all existence, the ground of all reality. For a Hindu, one has to live one's life in some profound acknowledgement of this divine source, because of whom or without whom we are not. Because that sustaining is a continuous act on the part of the divine. Without that continuous sustenance, we do not exist. But I would then add that, when I contemplate or I look at the Hindu sacred texts, what I see is that the divine brings forth everything out of divine fullness, as divine self-expression. Life is described in our tradition as a great gift. It is a great gift to know that one and to know each other. But that gift also comes with a certain order in the universe, a certain, what I would describe as a certain moral order. So we are invited by the divine, if I would use those terms, to the celebration of existence, the celebration of life, because it's divine, creation is divine celebration. But at the same time, it is not a celebration without responsibilities, without obligations on our part. So there is a moral order, there is a moral law. And that's what we speak of in the Hindu tradition. People, of course, have different interpretations, but all of our traditions speak in one way or another about the law of karma. And so when we speak about responsibility, I would put it in this way. I would say, we are invited to a certain way of being by God, a certain way that reflects the truth of the divine, the truth of reality, but we do so with cognizance of this moral order. So let me give you an example of what I mean and what it would mean to me. So the divine exists equally in everyone. That's a fundamental Hindu teaching. And therefore I should regard and revere everyone as I regard and revere my own self. I should value others as I value myself. And but if I don't, if I am unjust to others, if I am cruel, if I ill-treat others, then there are consequences. There are personal consequences, of course. There are also social consequences. So to be fundamentally responsible to the divine is to also be fundamentally responsible and cognizant of that moral order, that moral law in which we live. And at the same time, if I express my responsibility to the divine and the moral order of the universe by love, by generosity, by compassion, which truly reflects the ultimate nature of the divine and the fundamental nature of reality, then there is greater joy in myself, and I contribute to greater joy and delight in the community in which I live, because my life values are now in harmony with the source of life itself. And I flourish, and the community in which I exist also flourishes. So that is the larger context in which I would speak about responsibility. But one last point, that is, in the most ancient texts, the human person is consistently described from birth itself as, the Sanskrit word that is used is rina, which means to live indebted. We're born into owing others. We are in debt. In other words, what it means is that we cannot be fully human outside of the community of the universe and other living beings. The whole idea of interdependent existence is really fundamental to the Hindu tradition. But the Hindu tradition speaks of responsibilities of this interdependent condition. Not only acknowledging it, but also asks the question, if we truly live in this interdependent reality, what are our responsibilities to each other? Because I receive, I should give. Not because I fear, but because that's the way to the prosperity and flourishing of a human community. So we find in a text like the Bhagavad Gita, where the teacher Krishna says, one who receives from others, one who receives from the universe without the responsibility, feeling the responsibility of giving back, is a thief. You take without giving. So we are invited into a way of living in which we are cognizant of our responsibility. We are receivers, we can't help it. That's a very natural condition of human existence. But we could choose to be givers or not. And we have a responsibility to reciprocate receiving by giving.
So we answer to God. Part of how God has set up the world means that our responsibility to God also entails our responsibilities to one another, because God has put us fundamentally in relataip with one another.
Yes. Okay. That's a good crisp summary of what I said in many. And to be responsible to God is also to be cognizant of the moral order, the moral law, which permeates the universe. And I should say that responsibility, Matt, as I'm sure you infer from what I have said, is not an anthropocentric responsibility. It extends to the whole community of life.
It makes a great difference to the ways that we live our lives and even conceive of our lives, how we understand not just who we are, but what we are. Yeah. So I wonder if you'd tell us a little bit, what is a human being and what is the human place in the world?
It's very clear that the Hindu tradition understands human beings to have a very unique place in creation. And that unique place, I think, arises from the gift of self-consciousness that we we are blessed with, that we enjoy. Not only do we exist, but we know that we exist, and that can be a source of great joy, but it's also a burden to live with. So we are, and we know that we are. We enjoy a unique consciousness is expressed in us in a very unique way, in our ability to know, in the will that we have, in freedom of choice that we enjoy. This uniqueness has never been articulated in the Hindu tradition in terms of human superiority to others, but much more in terms of human obligations and human responsibilities. That's where the emphasis is often found. It wouldn't be articulated in the sense of, well, you are the most privileged species in the universe, or with a right to dominate and to use all the resources and all other living beings for your own purposes. Your uniqueness is a gift that should be used to know the divine, to know the ultimate reality, and to live one's life in harmony with that truth. So to be human, I think I would say it's a privilege. In the Hindu tradition, it's a gift. In the Hindu tradition, it's a responsibility. It comes with deep moral obligations.
You're speaking before about ways there are fundamental interconnectedness. That to be human is, of course, to relate to one another, but also to be in a sort of, I think if I'm understanding you right, to be in a sort of network of relationships with all other living things.
You can't miss it if you read the Hindu texts. Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads repeatedly remind us that God created everything within God's own self. Everything is within divine reality. There's no place or space outside of divine reality. There's no place or space outside of divine reality. Everything exists within divine reality, and everything is interpenetrated by that divine being. So we are in God, and God exists equally in every one of us. The universe is sacred. I would have to use that word. It invites our reverence. Life is sacred, creation is sacred, and every being, everything that exists in the natural world has a sanctity, because since the divine exists in all and in everything, therefore it is proper to say, as we say in the Hindu tradition, that every form is in a way a form of the divine. We should, when we see well, when we see clearly, we discern and we see the divine present in everyone and in everything. And this includes, all the other living beings that are part of the universe. But it also includes the trees, and it includes the sun and the moon. So we have a very beautiful word, Matt, in Sanskrit that we use in the Hindu tradition. It's called darshan. Darshan means to see, but darshan means sacred seeing. Sacred seeing, which means to be aware and mindful that the universe and everything we see in the universe is sacred, and to bring a spirit of reverence to that. And that reverence also, we should not forget, comes with also moral obligations. But those moral obligations spring out of that reverence. if we just speak about the moral obligations and not about the reverence, the sacred, something fundamentally is missing. Because I'm often asked, how is my pedagogy informed by my Hindu spirituality? How does my role as a teacher in a college setting? And I always answer by saying, like you as a teacher, Matt, we prepare ourselves each day to go into the class. What do I want my students to read? What questions I'm going to ask about the reading, how I'm going to engage them around the topic. We all do that diligently and as part of our responsibility. But I would always sit in my office quietly for a few moments before I went to class. And I would remind myself that I am entering a sacred space. The classroom is a sacred space, and I would invoke an attitude of reverence for each of my students that I'm going to encounter into that, and in that space. I know that on those days when I invoke that disposition in my heart, I would be a better teacher for me. It informed how this darshan, or seeing the sacred in my students, informed profoundly my methodology, because it disposed me to be attentive to them, to be mindful of them, to be respectful of everything that they said and every question that they asked. It meant for me giving myself fully to them in that relationship. One of my favorite Hindu texts is the opening verse of the Isha Upanishad. Isha means God or the Lord, the teaching of the divine. I should say it's also part of my daily practice, my morning prayer and meditation. In fact, I should add, I recall now that Mahatma Gandhi once said that if in the Hindu tradition we lost all of our sacred texts, but we only had the opening verse of the Isha Upanishad, we would have what it means to be a Hindu. So in Sanskrit, this is the verse: Isha Vasyam idam sarvam yat kinchit jagatyam jagat tena tyaktena bhunjita ma grida kasya swidhanam. Isha Vasyam idam sarvam yat kinchit jagatyam jagat. Whatever exists in this universe is embraced in the divine, is enfolded in the divine. See the universe wrapped. Isha Vasyam. Isha is God. Vasyam means embraced in, wrapped in. See the universe wrapped in God, embraced in God. Whatever exists, know it to be enfolded in God. Tyaktena bhunjita. Delight in everything and in everyone without possessiveness. Or another translation is give up and delight. Ma grida kasya swidhanam. Do not covet that which another owns. So in the last line, I think we have what this teaching means in terms of our relationships. In other words, we should not be envious of others' flourishing, others' prosperity. We should also delight in the flourishing and the prosperity of others. So I think it gives us a way of being in relation to the natural world, but also a way of being in relation with each other, that we should delight in each other's flourishing. But that's a very interesting line. Tena tyaktena bhunjita. Do not own. Rejoice without possessiveness. It is because the universe is not yours. It is the divine. And not claiming it, not possessing it, opens up a deeper way of enjoy. So give up, renounce, don't claim, don't possess, and and enjoy and delight in everything. And that, I think, that deeply informs what it means to be human for me, but also what it means to recognize that I live in a universe that is still deeply infused with mystery. And I think that it would be a great tragedy, and I think it is a great tragedy. We have lost, for so many reasons, a more reductive understanding of the world in which we live, materialistic reductionism, drawing conclusions from the scientific method, which I don't think are necessarily proper conclusions, but there is also kind of scientific reductionism, but has taken away any sense of the sacredness, of the sacred. To lose that for me is to lose what it means to be human.
We've been thinking for many years now at the Center for Faith and Culture about sort of life itself and certainly visions of flourishing life in terms of three aspects. Aspect of life sort of feeling some sort of way as it should, life going well in terms of life circumstances, life led well in terms of our agency. I'll just talk about each of those three and hear how you see the Hindu traditions replying to these. The most important for many traditions of these three aspects is what it means to lead our lives well. So I wonder, in your own life and as you live within the Hindu traditions, how do you understand it? What does it mean to lead our lives well?
I think the best way to offer a response to that question, Matt, is to reference what the Hindu tradition has sort of consistently described as a good life. What are the elements of the good life? And I think one can't speak about that in the Hindu tradition without, again, coming back to what we speak of in Sanskrit as the purusharthas, life goals, legitimate life goals. And so there are four. There are four components or four dimensions that together work to make the good life, to create the good life. In order, in sequence, whenever the list is given, the list appears in so many ways in the Hindu sacred text. The first is dharma. Dharma is the concept that really emphasizes human responsibilities, human obligations that flow from the interdependent nature of our existence. So that we cannot live our lives without attentiveness to the impact of decisions we make, choices we make on others in the immediate circle of our existence, but also in the larger circle of the universe. We have to be cognizant and with a deep sense of moral and ethical responsibility for how our choices in life impact others in our families, in our communities, and ultimately at the heart of that concept of dharma is what in the Bhagavad Gita Krishna speaks of as loka sangraha. I often translate it as the common good, and he says there, in every choice you make, be cognizant of the common good. So a person who lives a life without that kind of consciousness and attentiveness to that in choices that would be an incomplete a Hindu life that lacks something very fundamental. But at the same time, so dharma first, priority is to be human is to be attentive to dharma and to the moral obligations of dharma. But at the same time, we have graduate addresses in the Upanishads where after students have studied with their teachers, the teacher says, continue to study and teach, but don't be inattentive to your material well-being. Yes, which is in Sanskrit artha. Sometimes in this, I'm not sure how strong it is, but often described as a sort of an anti-materialistic tradition indifferent to prosperity in the world. But that's not true, because artha, or wealth, which includes success, power, whatever freedom that we need to realize our goals, is recognized as a necessary and legitimate goal. A decent, dignified human life is not a life lived in poverty. Poverty is a form of suffering, and therefore material well-being is valued and commended.
How, in the context of that, how should we make sense of Gandhi's commendation of a pretty strict, as I read it, a pretty strict asceticism, where one of his sort of practices of sort of non-possession. I think he even glosses in the English translation as itself poverty, right? A sort of obviously that's a voluntary poverty. It's very different from an involuntary poverty, and it's a voluntary poverty maybe taken up with the goal of relieving involuntary poverty of others.
It's a very good question, and I was struck also by, I read it a long time ago, but the readings you sent me, it's also, it jumped at me. And I think that Gandhi, was lifting up a certain understanding of the Hindu tradition, and as you mentioned, a very ascetic understanding of the Hindu tradition. Some scholars have argued, and I think with good grounds, that Gandhi's asceticism as a householder, because again, we have the 4 goals and we have the 4 stages of life, but he was bringing a sort of a radical asceticism even to the life of the married person, what we speak of as the householder stage in life. And there's argument that was much more deeply influenced by Jainism than by Hinduism. Because Jainism is a radically ascetic tradition. The aspiration is that everyone should, at some point in time, embrace the ascetic life. It has a very different view of the human body and its place and purpose in existence. So that is one explanation for Gandhi's particular view. And the second is that the kind of asceticism that he was commending for the householder really belongs to what we speak of as the 4th stage of life, the stage of renunciation. And so his interpretation was not, in that sense, mainstream. Okay. Because the householder stage of life in Hinduism is the stage in which, one should be attentive and diligent about wealth gathering, about the education of one's children, about sharing with one's community. So Gandhi, his teaching that one should not think of tomorrow or make any preparations for tomorrow is what really would be the sort of values that one would associate with the renunciant order. Of course, all things are to be done in moderation, even for the householder. So the pursuit of wealth or artha, and the fact that was not understood to be a bare minimum is emphasized in what would be the third goal. So you have dharma, which I've spoken about, the moral dimension of life, wealth, the material dimension of life, and thirdly, the aesthetic dimension of life. That even the verse that I quoted to you from the Isha Upanishad speaks of enjoying. And here you have life should be, the word is karma, or pleasure. The pleasure of friendship, the pleasure of the arts, the pleasure of music is part of the good life.
Yeah.
A good life is not one that is reduced to an ascetic minimum. Pleasure as a component of life, which in the Hindu tradition included, healthy sexual life as well. So that's why, Gandhi, I must say, was very deeply troubled by the fact that in so many of the Hindu temples, you had scenes that depicted human sexuality. He wanted those to be taken down, to be removed, because he could not imagine that, given his own dispositions, that even a healthy sexual life is part of what it means to be human, and is not inconsistent also with spiritual commitments. And finally, the fourth goal that I'll mention, while the tradition commends pleasure, as vital as these pleasures are, they are short-lived. So I distinguish perhaps between pleasure and joy. The fourth goal is spoken of as moksha. But moksha is the goal that takes us to a deeper place of meaning, a deeper place of joy, that is quite distinct from the joy of a good meal, the joy of a good conversation, the joy of listening to the music that we love. All of those are beautiful and proper and have their place. But an abiding joy, a lasting joy, a joy that is capable of enduring even in the midst of suffering, in the midst of life's pain. That is a joy that we discover only through divine awareness, a life that is centered in divinity, a life that is centered in the ultimate nature of the universe. And if we don't, come to that goal, there will also be something fundamentally missing, incomplete, inadequate in life.
What does it mean, as far as you understand it, for life to go well? What's important or sort of worth wanting when it comes to life's circumstances?
As a Hindu, one would want to ensure that one has the requisite material necessities for decent living. That is fundamental, that one has good relationships with one's family members, with the members of one's community and the larger human community, that one is not living within oppressive social structures that impedes one's ability to flourish and to pursue in freedom what is important, one's life goals, and the opportunity for spiritual growth. Now, I would have to say that life going well does not mean that life is without suffering. It doesn't mean that a life that is completely rid of suffering. Because there is a recognition, if I would name it or call it natural suffering, that is part of what it means to be human. So to be human is to be born, to grow, to change, to age, to eventually die, at least the physical death. All of those are conditions that are accompanied by certain kinds of suffering, especially when we grow old and we are subject to illness and our bodies decline and eventually we die. So life going well is not a life that is free from these kinds of natural suffering. And the Hindu tradition doesn't promise that one would be free from this kind of suffering. But it offers an understanding of life that even with these conditions of suffering, there can be a deep and abiding peace. There can be a deep and abiding state of contentedness and joy, even with what would be these natural forms of suffering.
What does it mean for life to feel as it should? What's worth hoping for when it comes to emotional sort of aspect of life?
Joy is integral to that life feeling well. The word we use in Sanskrit for that is ananda. Ananda is joy. But as I said, we distinguish ananda or joy from the more transient forms of pleasure and enjoyment that, as I said, we should not negativize because they are also embraced as part of the good life. But ananda is distinguished from those more transitory forms of pleasure. And I think what ananda really means is freedom from a persistent, nagging, troubling, you can add many words there, sense of personal incompleteness, personal inadequacy, a freedom from nagging sense of want, and a discovery of a profound fullness of self, a profound fullness of self, which is discovered only by awakening to the divine. The divine gift to us that comes with creation itself is a fullness of self, a fullness of being. The divine is present in us as that full being. And in knowing that alone frees us from inadequacy, from want, which then expresses itself in greed and all of the implications of greedful relationships and greedful relationships with others and also with the world. And that condition is really what is joy, what is ananda. Because the very nature of the divine is that fullness. And only in discovering that fullness in ourselves can we be at peace. Can we discover a condition of contentedness that lacks nothing. If we can imagine that, Matt, that it is possible to live out of joy rather than always seeking joy. The joy is a gift that we can discover and live every day out of. Embrace, it's a joyful embrace of life every day, because the joy is an innate, inherent, intrinsic fullness.
Yeah. Joy as a resource rather than as a goal.
As a goal, yeah. Joy as a resource rather than as a goal. Or joy as a truth of oneself rather than as an
aspiration.
As an aspiration.
When I read in the Gita, the sort of renunciation of the fruits of one's actions and focus on duty instead, I found myself really relating to that quite a lot. That this is a powerful way to live, to sort of free one from all sorts of anxieties about the outcomes of one's actions that are outside of one's control. To ride the roller coaster of success and failure if I'm just invested in attending to my duty. As a Christian, I think about my duty, my calling from God in similar, I think, analogous sorts of terms that have been really, really helpful to me. But in that way of life, it also ends up being really important in my practice that's centered in my understanding that God loves me, and I wonder, honest question, I'm curious, in your understanding it, does God love us? Is that fullness of God that God has given to us, would it be an appropriate interpretation of that to say that this is evidence that God loves us?
I have given some thought to this question because in my own contemplation, those texts, the Upanishad texts that describe, going back to the descriptions of creation and everything coming out of the divine, creation as divine self-multiplication, divine self-expression, because, the Hindu tradition and all of its major interpreters have not, if I had to describe a Hindu theology of creation, it would be creatio ex deus, creation from the divine, not the more traditional creatio ex nihilo. And I have views on that. I think they are not very different as they might seem to be. But when I ask myself the question, why would the divine bring forth everything out of itself? I see it as an act of love, because I don't know what it would mean if it is not divine love expressing itself in creation, because for me also, as a Hindu, the divine is love, and the divine brings forth everything out of love. And even when I read texts like Ishavasya, Upanishad I quoted to you, which uses such tender language, everything is enfolded, everything is embraced in God. Without using love language, that for me is love language, because it speaks to the preciousness and the value of everything embraced in the divine. And I'm sure perhaps you would not also speak of love as a quality or as an attribute of God, but as the very nature, as the very essence, as the very nature. Whatever we say about God is God. I put it, whatever we say about God is God. So love for me is the very nature of that being. And I can easily say, without contradicting anything fundamental in the Hindu tradition, that when I say that we all exist in God and God exists in all, that we exist in love, and love is at the very heart of the divine exists in us as love. That very goes for me to the very heart of what life's meaning is. So yes, to your question, I can use the language of love to speak about the divine and the world in relation to. I often say, I mean, if it is not out of love, we are in deep trouble. If love is not at the very heart of what it means, or what the sacred means, and what we mean to the sacred, and what we mean to each other, our world, if I would use that language, is only going to be saved by love. All the crises that we face fundamentally express a dearth of our ability to love each other, and love alone is our hope, and that love has its fundamental roots in the nature of the sacred. Our flourishing, our ability to flourish, if I would use language that is so congenial to you and I know what you hold to be dear. Our ability to flourish in this universe depends on our ability to love.
It's a reality for any of us who understand ourselves to be responsible to live our lives in a particular sort of way, is, of course, the possibility that we will fail to live up to these aspirations of ours, or even this sense of what we hold ourselves to be responsible to. So what should we do when we fail to live the lives that we ought to?
Someone told me a story recently about, a monk who was traveling to a place of pilgrimage, which was his destination, his goal. And it was a long and arduous and challenging route. And on the way, and he noticed an ant also walking along. It's a long journey, and but the ant also had a broken leg. But the ant was also traveling the pilgrimage route. So he asked with some sarcasm, to the ant, where are you going? And he says, I'm going where you are also going. I want to get to this sacred place that you are traveling. And he laughed and he said, but how will you ever get there? Your steps are so small, and you also a broken leg. Why do you think you will ever reach that destination? And the ant said to him, it doesn't matter, I am on the way. And that's what is important. I am on the journey. I am on the way. And we have the sincerity of being on the way. That is where we would find our meaning. You referenced a little bit earlier a really important teaching and text from the Bhagavad Gita, that where Krishna says, we don't have control over the outcomes of our actions, but we have control on the choice of the action. But we never can guarantee any outcome. The universe is complex. We don't control all the factors that go into producing a particular outcome. But as long as we sincerely choose to do what is right, even when the outcome is not to be guaranteed, that gives meaning and significance and depth to what we do. That we should not measure success in any action only by its outcome, but also the meaning is also found in the choice to engage in a particular action. So we will fail, but we are on the way. If I would quote the ant, we are on the way.
It's failures of outcome, and then there's failures of will, where I actually find myself willing what I wish I had not. right? Does that make sense? I undertake actions that I wish later, I further reflection, I realize I should not have. You know?
Well, I think the hope is exactly in what you have said. I mean, at some point, through reflection, coming to understand, I chose an action that I should not have chosen. And understanding why I might have done that. Being gentle with oneself. Being gentle with oneself. We often forget that compassion and love are also to be extended to our own selves as we extend to others, that we have to embrace ourselves, which if we don't do, I don't think we are capable of embracing others. But to love oneself also is to love oneself with all one's frailties, with all one's weaknesses. At the heart of and at the ground of the universe is an infinite love that embraces us and through which we can also embrace ourselves, which we should embrace ourselves. We must embrace ourselves. And that is that is something that's to be done with deep integrity and honesty and truth, but they're not inconsistent.
Anant, thank you.
Thank you for this wonderful conversation, Matt. I appreciate it very much.
Likewise.